Welcome back. Now that each party has its presumptive nominee, the vice presidential selection process ramps up in earnest. Few things tell us as much about a candidate, how they operate, as how they go about their search, and who they ultimately choose. Adam Goldberg knows the process well, having helped candidate Bill Clinton with his selection of Al Gore in 1992. He is co-founder of the public affairs firm Trident DMG. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
What a moment. I mean, some of the smartest people in politics, and this is kind of the lead into the conversation we're going to have about vice presidential candidate vetting. Some of the smartest people in politics would have bet, I'll bet a 3 months mortgage at the beginning of all this, that you would not get Donald Trump as the last of 17 candidates standing, and for the first time in history. And I guess there's sort of a question embedded in this because Clinton's not quite there yet. Do you believe that Hillary Clinton is someone we can fairly refer to as the presumptive nominee for the Democrats? And again, what do you make of Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Trump, I think many of us are still shaking our heads wondering, how did we get here? Why are we here right now? I think the mistake I'm worried about people making is now people are sort of overestimating Donald Trump in the general election, thinking since we couldn't predict where he was before, now we can't predict where he's going to be. But now we have so much more data, understand so much more how the electorate thinks of him, that Hillary Clinton, who I do think is going to be the presumptive nominee, is clearly leagues ahead of where Trump is as of now.
So you're a lifelong Democrat. Do you worry that your party will be overconfident given what early polling tells us about how these two stack up against one another in a general?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in Hillary, we have a very experienced veteran candidate here. So I think, her team is very experienced. They're very aggressive. They know what they're dealing with. I think they've learned the lessons that the Republican, primary candidates learned, which is you have to attack Donald Trump early. You have to take him on, say everything he says, just like sort of the war room experience in the 1992 presidential race that Clinton learned early on as well.
And in some ways, you have to learn to anticipate the unanticipatable, because Donald Trump is the sort of is a person, is a performer, is a rhetorical, he has rhetorical style, gifts you could call them, unlike probably anyone we've ever seen before.
Yeah, well, I think of him as the clickbait candidate. Every day he'll say something to try to draw attention. That's worked really well for him.
Or divert attention if he's having a bad day.
Or divert, that's right. And that's worked really well with him with the Republican base. But at the same time, as we see the Republican base numbers going for him well, it's really alienated the rest of the electorate, which is why his unfavorabilities are like up in the 60s right now.
I remember a long, long time ago, when Doug Wilder was running for the governor in Virginia, polls showed him ahead of Republican Marshall Coleman by a lot. When the ballots were counted, Wilder won, but it was very narrow. And the takeaway for a lot of political observers was that people answering questions from a pollster on the phone, and in those days, 1989, everything was on the phone, they didn't want to seem racist. So they said they were for Wilder when they weren't, when in reality, something, quite possibly, likely race, had them voting for Marshall Coleman in the general. Is there a potential equivalent here in that people, I mean, this nation's never nominated or elected a woman. Is it possible the polls are lying and that the polls are, that voting behavior will be very different?
I don't think, well, it's possible that voting behavior will be different now because the polls will change. I think the polling will probably be pretty predictable as we get closer. But certainly, Trump right now, even if he gains 5% in each of the polls in the battleground states, he still loses by a sizable lead in the electorate. So he has to make up really an incredible amount of ground in the polling to really challenge Senator Clinton.
A recent bipartisan report said that a professional, solid vetting process, one that does right, not just for the candidate and his or her party, but for the nation, given that this person will be a heartbeat away from the presidency, that to do this thing right takes 8 weeks. Where do you think these two candidates are at this moment, and what would you say to buttress this notion that this is serious business and must be done professionally and well?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And 8 weeks does sound about right. You see, there are really two different kind of vetting going on right now. There's the vetting that each candidate's political people are beginning to do, and then there's the vetting that all the law firms around town are beginning to do, which is really an extensive deep dive into candidates' history from the time they're in 6th grade on up, into everything they've said, everything they've written, every personal relationship they've had. It's really a deep dive in everybody's personal lives, their financial lives, and then of course their public and political lives.
And never have we had a time where there's more available about all of us as individuals, and these the people who end up as the shortlisters in particular. There's just so much about all of us out there.
Right.
Ultimately, that doesn't tell you everything about this process, but it's a huge place to start.
Right. The first place to start certainly is going to be like looking at social media and online, but then you ask questions that you would never have had to ask before, like are there sex tapes? Are there other things about you, inappropriate sort of videos that your friends may have about you? Did you post things and then take them down? Just in the age of social media, you just have to probe that much more deeply into a whole other subject that 15, 20 years ago we didn't have to look into.
So some of it, I would presume, revolves around or requires honesty from the potential VP.
No,
right? You've got to sit them down and, first of all, they have to remember everything they've ever done, and then to the extent that they remember the sex tape or the bong video or whatever, right? They have to be willing to share, knowing that it could be embarrassing and it could hurt their chances if this is something they want.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one exception to the Washington rule that everything leaks, the vetting process is one exception, because you almost never hear of any leaks coming out of things learned during the vetting process. So that should give candidates some comfort. And usually they're discussing that maybe with one person who will also discuss it maybe 2 or 3 people on the candidate side. So the chance of leaking, but you're right, it relies entirely on honesty, apart from just what's on the public record.
There's also all the financial stuff. Who have they dealt with? Where are they vulnerable to attack in terms of contributions taken, favors done, outright illegality, things that were legal but would look bad? I mean,
that's right.
Financial's huge.
That's right. You're looking not only just at the tax returns, you're looking at every loan that person has taken, every loan or that person has given or made to other folks. You're really examining every aspect to try to conceive of something that could be an attack against that person and undermine their legitimacy. And
as you're going through all the things you're finding, I guess in your thinking about it, you're like, okay, if I was on the other side and I found this, what would I do with it? Because if you're vetting for Hillary Clinton and you find something on a potential, a Tom Perez or whomever, right, Tim Kaine, whatever, you're probably 99% sure the other side will find it too. And then the question is, okay, if Trump has this, what I've just found, what do they do with it? And how bad is it? Is it lights out, or is it something that simply has to be responded to in a powerful way, in a clever way?
It really depends on what it is. So anything that you could turn up in vetting that could possibly conceivably get out, you're going to want to do that in your time frame and make sure you get that out, unless it's something disqualifying. So 20 years ago, maybe not paying nanny taxes may have been disqualifying. Now things have moved on, and there are other things that have probably become disqualifying. So once you get past the disqualifying things, then it's just okay. Then you're into political strategy of how could you mitigate that and getting it out.
And someone you've known a long time, someone you and I have both known a long time, former White House Special Counsel Lanny Davis, once wrote a very interesting book, the title of which was "Tell It All, Tell It Early, Tell It Yourself." I might have the order wrong, but those were the 3 things, right? Tell it all, tell it early, tell it yourself. So we all have something, probably in our past, that we wished weren't there, but too late, it's there.
Right.
So now the issue is, how do you deal with it? And Lanny's strategy is right there on the cover of his book.
Yes. I mean, if there's anything bad in there that doesn't disqualify you, you've chosen your candidate now and you're going for it, and you know there's some really questionable things, that's right. You're going to, as soon as you choose that candidate, you're going to be working on that strategy so that shortly after the announcement, before the convention, you get it all out so that the convention steps on it and you move on.
And sometimes you're not passive in that, well, there's this thing, and we know it's going to come out, and we'll just sit and wait for it to come out. Sometimes you say, since it's coming out anyway, let's control it. Let's pick a Friday night. Let's leak it to the San Jose Mercury News and give it to them at 2 a.m. And then when everyone else asks about it, you can say, that's old news. The San Jose paper had that Friday. Today's Sunday. Why are you still talking about that whole thing?
You know our playbook.
I do.
That's exactly what you do. AP is another favorite target. Something that goes out, major papers don't want to cover, and you just get it out. That's exactly right.
Does geography matter?
In terms of where you pick a candidate?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, everybody likes to think you're going to pick a vice presidential candidate. It'll help you win that candidate state. The data shows otherwise. That it makes an uptake on the margins.
Why? Because I would think that with 40 of the 50 states having voted the same way in terms of party, going back, I think, to 2000, we're down to 10 states, and a lot of people say 3 or 4 or 5. So if you pick someone who's popular in one of those states, that doesn't give you a huge advantage?
You think it would, but the data shows otherwise. And so that's a real question for now for Secretary Clinton. If she were to choose Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, we'd probably lose that Senate seat because the Republican governor would appoint it. But otherwise he has, we think he would help Ohio, but the data indicates probably he wouldn't help that much.
How much does chemistry matter? Interpersonal comfort?
You'd like to think it matters a lot. When the candidate wants to choose, especially for something like Secretary Clinton, when you're going to have former President Clinton in the White House, you want to make sure there is good chemistry because of just the different roles that people might take on.
Was the selection of Sarah Palin an irresponsible act, not just in terms of John McCain's own personal political fortunes, but from a national perspective?
Oh, yes. I mean, it always used to amuse me when he used to say country first. I mean, I think the selection of Governor Palin showed that he wasn't putting country first. But clearly there was a breakdown in the vetting process on the political side of seeing did she really know what she was talking about.
People were flying to Alaska because McCain people were flying to Alaska to figure out who this lady was. They had no idea.
And clearly they still didn't have a good idea at the end of the vetting process.
We have 60 seconds left, unfortunately, is all. If you were advising Clinton or Trump, is there a name that would be atop the list for you for either?
I think for Secretary Clinton it would be Tim Kaine. I think he's moderate. He'll really appeal to the independents in between where she really wants to grab from Trump, and then she doesn't lose a state.
And he's fluent in Spanish.
And he's fluent in Spanish.
If you're Trump, will there be reluctance with people to sign up for Trump who might want to be vice president otherwise, but given this unusual year?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think a lot of people have already expressed reluctance. The question is, will I think Governor Kasich really be reluctant, or will Trump choose?
Is there a favorite?
I would think, everybody's saying Chris Christie, but I think he's too much like Donald Trump to really be on the ticket.
Although in 1992 we ended up with 2 white male Southerners, and they ended up serving 8 years. Veteran political insider Adam Goldberg is co-founder of the new public affairs firm Trident DMG. Thanks so much for your time. We hope you'll come back.
I will.
Great having you here. We're back with more News Talk in a moment.